I'm not begging, Karen said through chattering teeth as Joe's truck rumbled to a stop in front of her snow-entombed house. I'm simply requesting assistance for my minor. Joe leaned out the window of Winter's Bane, his expression unreadable behind his frosted beard. The plow, the same one she had banned, gleamed defiantly under the truck's headlights. Your minor has a name, Joe replied evenly. And Zoe texted Diane's kid that you're both freezing. Karen crossed her arms, snow settling on her expensive but utterly impractical coat. Are you going to help or just lecture me about neighborhood gossip? For an excruciating moment, Joe said nothing. Then he shifted the truck into gear. Move aside. This'll take about 20 minutes. The relief that flooded through Karen was as unwelcome as it was overwhelming. She watched as Joe expertly maneuvered the plow, clearing not just her driveway, but a path to her front door and around to her backup generator, which she'd forgotten they even had. When he finished, Joe climbed down from the truck and trudged through the snow to her backyard. 15 minutes later, the lights flickered on, and blessed heat began flowing from the vents. Inside, Zoe was already making hot chocolate for everyone. The generator needed fuel and a filter change, Joe explained, accepting the steaming mud with gloved hands. Should run about 72 hours on what you've got left. Karen stared into her own mug, unable to meet his eyes. I suppose a temporary exception to the HOA rules was warranted, given the extreme circumstances. Joe chuckled, a sound that seemed to thaw something in the room beyond just the temperature. You know what, Karen? That might be the closest thing to thank you I've ever heard you say. Don't push it, she muttered, but there was no real bite to her words. Later that night, after Joe had left to help more neighbors, Karen sat at her kitchen table scrolling through the community chat on her now-charged phone. The messages about her were not kind, and worse, they weren't wrong. Karen only cares about rules until she needs help. Notice how she got plowed out right after trying to find Joe? Classic Karen, first in line for help after causing the problem. Zoe sat down across from her. Mom, everyone's really mad. Karen set down her phone. They have been before. They'll get over it. No, Mom. This is different. Zoe's voice was quiet, but firm. You banned something that everyone needed, and then you used it anyway. That's hypocritical. The word hit Karen like a slap. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. 3 days later, when the county plows finally reached Pristine Pines, the HOA held an emergency meeting in the still unplowed community center parking lot. Karen arrived early, clipboard in hand as always, but instead of her usual agenda, she had a single sheet of paper. When everyone had gathered, standing in their snow boots and parkas, because the building remained without power, Karen cleared her throat. I'm stepping down as HOA president, she announced. A shocked silence fell over the group, broken only by the distant sound of plows working their way through the neighborhood. During this crisis, it became clear that sometimes rigid rules prevent common-sense solutions. Karen continued, her voice wavering slightly. I failed this community when it needed flexibility most. She turned to Joe. And I owe you an apology. Your Winter's Bane saved lives this week, including possibly mine and Zoe's. The resignation wasn't unanimously accepted. Surprisingly, several neighbors suggested Karen remain on the board, just not as president. Nobody knows the bylaws better, Mrs. Finley pointed out. We need that knowledge, balanced with other perspectives. As spring slowly melted away the remnants of Snowmageddon, something unexpected happened in Pristine Pines. An amended HOA charter passed unanimously, including a new Winter's Bane provision allowing emergency equipment during severe weather events. And when the following winter approached, Karen was spotted in Joe's driveway, clipboard still in hand. But this time, she was helping him install the plow, citing proper mounting procedures from the safety manual she'd thoroughly researched. Some said Karen hadn't really changed. She was still obsessed with rules and order, but others noticed the difference. Now she asked why, before saying no, and sometimes, just sometimes, she even smiled when Winter's Bane rumbled down their street, keeping them all safe from whatever storms might come. The meteorologists called it a bomb cyclone. The locals called it snowmagedon, but Karen Matthews called it a minor inconvenience, right up until the moment her power went out. 3 days into what had become the worst blizzard in 40 years, Karen stood at her bay window, clutching her third cup of rapidly cooling coffee, watching in horror as snow continued to fall with relentless determination. 4 feet had accumulated overnight, with drifts reaching second-story windows in some places. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling her live, love sign until it crashed to the floor. "Mom, I'm freezing," Zoe said, wrapped in 2 blankets on the couch. "Can't we go somewhere with power?" Karen's phone battery showed 8% remaining. Her brother-in-law's snow removal company hadn't answered her increasingly frantic texts since yesterday. The neighborhood group chat reported that his single-plow truck had broken down on the highway, miles from pristine Pines. "We're fine," Karen insisted, though the temperature in the house had dropped to 52 degrees. "The HOA Emergency Committee will handle this." The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. She was the HOA Emergency Committee. Karen's phone pinged with a message from the group chat. "Joe's offering to clear driveways for elderly residents with his banned plow, starting with Mrs. Abernathy on Oak Lane." Karen felt her face flush with anger despite the cold. The audacity. She'd specifically banned that eyesore. If Joe could just ignore HOA rules whenever he wanted, what was the point of having them at all? She fired back a message. "Reminder, personal snowplows violate HOA regulations. $100 daily fine still applies." The responses came swiftly. "Are you serious right now? My 80-year-old mother hasn't had heat for 36 hours. Joe is a hero." Karen read the room or the freezing house. She threw her phone down in disgust. Nobody understood the importance of rules and order. If they let this slide, next thing you knew, people would be painting their doors unapproved colors or, God forbid, installing visible satellite dishes. By afternoon, the temperature inside had dropped to 45 degrees. Karen and Zoe huddled under every blanket they owned in the living room, watching their breath form clouds in the air. "Mom," Zoe said quietly, "maybe we should ask Joe for help." "Absolutely not," Karen snapped. "We'll manage." But as darkness fell early that evening, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that no amount of blankets could ward off, Karen began to worry. The pipes might freeze. Zoe was shivering uncontrollably, and the snow showed no signs of stopping. Through the window, she caught glimpses of headlights, Joe's truck moving slowly down the street, his banned plow clearing a path house by house. The neighbors were coming out to thank him, offering thermoses of hot drinks. Some were crying with relief. Karen watched, conflicted, as Joe's truck approached Mrs. Finley's house, just 2 doors down from hers. Her phone chirped one final time before dying completely. Emergency notice. County snowplows unable to reach pristine Pines for minimum 48 hours due to highway conditions. Residents advised to shelter in place. As the light from Joe's truck illuminated her living room, Karen made a decision that tasted like bitter metal in her mouth. She grabbed her coat. "Stay here," she told Zoe. "I'll be right back." She stepped onto her front porch, the snow immediately soaking through her inappropriate footwear. Joe's truck was pulling away from Mrs. Finley's now cleared driveway. Karen Matthews, HOA president, took a deep breath, swallowed her pride, and began to wave desperately for help. The first snowflake had barely touched the ground when Karen Matthews stormed across the freshly salted driveway, her designer snow boots squeaking against the pavement, clipboard clutched to her chest like a medieval shield. Her target, Joe Harmon's vintage 1978 Ford F-250 with its custom welded snowplow attachment that he proudly named Winter's Bane. Joseph Allen Harmon. Karen's voice cut through the crisp December air with the precision of an ice pick. "That monstrosity cannot remain on pristine Pines property. It violates Code 7.32 of our HOA bylaws. No commercial equipment shall be visible from the street." Joe, halfway through mounting the plow to his beloved truck, straightened up with a sigh that crystallized in the frigid morning air. He'd dealt with Karen Matthews, self-appointed HOA enforcement queen, for 5 years now. The neighbors had a betting pool on what she'd find to complain about each month. Karen, it's not commercial. I use it to clear our cul-de-sac so people can actually get to work. You know, like I did last year, when you thanked me. Karen's thin lips pressed together like she was trying to create a diamond between them. That was before I fully understood our responsibility to property values. Do you know what snowplows do to property values, Joseph? From her upstairs window, Karen's teenage daughter Zoe watched with embarrassment, texting her friends. Mom's at it again. Snowplow Apocalypse 2025. Actually, Karen, Joe scratched his salt and pepper beard. I think being able to leave your house during winter probably increases property values. Karen's eyes narrowed dangerously. The HOA has hired a professional service this year. Your contraction is neither needed nor wanted. What Karen didn't mention was that the professional service was her brother-in-law's fledgling company, which had exactly one plow and zero experience. But family connections meant everything in Pristine Pines. 2 days later, Joe received an official HOA violation notice with a $100 daily fine until winter's bane was removed or stored out of sight. The neighborhood group chat exploded with debate. Most residents supported Joe, but Karen controlled the 5-member HOA board with an iron fist and had the deciding vote. At the emergency HOA meeting held in the community center, Karen stood triumphantly before the packed room. The board has voted 3-2 to ban all personal snowplows from Pristine Pines. This protects our aesthetic standards and prevents liability issues. What liability issues? Asked Diane from across the street. Karen's rehearsed smile didn't reach her eyes. What if someone slips on a poorly plowed road? The HOA could be sued. Our insurance premiums would skyrocket. Joe stood up. Karen, the weather service is predicting the worst winter storm in decades next week. Your brother-in-law's company can't possibly handle it with one truck. That's an exaggeration, Karen sniffed. Besides, the storm will probably miss us entirely. As the meeting dissolved into angry murmurs, Karen collected her designer handbag and cashmere scarf, feeling the familiar rush of power. Order would be maintained, standards would be upheld, and most importantly, Karen Matthews would be obeyed. What she didn't notice was the weather alert lighting up everyone's phones simultaneously, or the worried glances exchanged around the room. The storm had accelerated, the forecast had worsened dramatically, and winter's bane remained firmly locked in Joe's garage, exactly as Karen had demanded.